Welcome to another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show, where you improve your ability to make the wisest and most profitable decisions. And today we'll improve that ability by talking about strategic planning and the SWOT analysis. Now, many business leaders see it as a wonderful opportunity to have a clear plan for the future. That's what strategic planning is about, right? And you do various analysis to address the weaknesses of human thinking, because we kind of have a lot of problems when we make strategic plans for the future as human beings because of the ways that our brain is wired. What's called dangerous judgment errors are called cognitive biases. If you've been watching the Wise Decision Maker Show, if you've been checking out the Wise Decision Maker Show for a while, you already know about this pretty well. So, business leaders who know a little bit about some of the problems that we experience use strategic planning assessments such as the SWOT analysis. Now, the SWOT analysis refers to addressing and assessing your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So usually it's done in groups. Sometimes it's a single business leader or professional who assesses their career, or a solopreneur who assesses their business. More often it's a group of people, business leaders, who get together in a room and they look at, hey, here's a project, or here's our strategic plan for the next 5 years. What are the strengths facing our business? What are the weaknesses? What are the opportunities? And what are the threats? Unfortunately, for these folks, whether they do it by themselves, individuals who look at their career, look at their business, look at their enterprise, or for a group of leaders, for a team if it's in the department, the SWOT analysis is fatally flawed. It's a really dangerous analysis in many ways because it gives leaders a sense of false comfort, false security. People feel that they're doing the right thing, but unfortunately it kind of screws them up in the end because they think they're all safe, they did what they need to do, and they invest their resources in accordance with what they perceive as their strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Now, you might not be surprised that I'm criticizing this, that I'm saying that there are serious issues with the SWOT analysis and with many other similar strategic assessments because of our cognitive biases. And the vast majority of SWOT analysis don't take into account our cognitive biases. So they're all skewed. They're all skewed in the bad direction that really harms leaders, professionals who do these SWOT analysis and other sorts of strategic assessments. One of the most dangerous cognitive biases that harms leaders, teams that do strategic assessments like the SWOT analysis, is called the overconfidence bias. Now, research on this topic has shown that leaders at all levels, whether they're at the very top, whether they're middle management, whether they're supervisors, tend to be greatly overconfident about themselves, their abilities, their teams. They have way too much confidence about what's going on in the future. So they unfortunately make bad decisions when they do the SWOT analysis. And it's actually the people who are, according to research on this topic, who are most successful, who tend to be the most overconfident, right? Now that I say this, it might not be a surprise to you, but before I said it, you probably wouldn't have guessed this, because you see, people who are successful, they must be doing something right. Well, they're also the most overconfident. They tend to grow arrogant over time. And if you, quoting Proverbs 6:18 from the Bible, pride goeth before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall, right? You might have heard that. So this is a dangerous problem, and there are warnings already in the Bible about this. So that's one big one. A related problem is the optimism bias. We have a tendency to look at the world through rose-colored glasses about things that we like, and this is especially a big problem for leaderships at the very top. They tend to be the most optimistic. Whether it's CEOs or entrepreneurs, founders, owners, they tend to be the people who are most optimistic, and that of course harms their ability to make effective strategic plans. They tend to overvalue their skills, their knowledge, their ability, the value of their business, the value of their team, and so on. And that results in a huge set of problems according to the research, ranging from for public companies making too high earnings estimates, in mergers paying too much when acquiring companies, and so on. So lots of problems. Now, how does this play out in relation to the SWOT, you might be wondering? Well, in lots of times when I go into a client engagement as a coach or consultant, about 70% of my clients have done some sort of strategic planning, and for a little bit, maybe over half of those 70%, so half of 70, about 35%, have done the SWOT analysis. And literally every time, and I'm not like exaggerating here, literally every time I've seen people do the SWOT analysis, they list way too many strengths, way too many opportunities, not nearly enough weaknesses, not nearly enough threats, because of what we just talked about. Because they have this problem in their heads where they tend to be too optimistic and overconfident. And so naturally, people who are optimistic and who are overconfident would list too many strengths, too many opportunities, not nearly enough weaknesses, not nearly enough threats. And that's a big problem. Now, I'll give you an example of how this plays out. So there was someone who I was working with. His name is Raj. He was a technology startup founder. Now, the capital investors who are the capital investors, the venture capital investors who are investing into the startup, they asked him to work with me once the startup passed $10 million in funding. And so they sent him to me. They knew me, so they sent him to me. I started working with him, and he did a SWOT analysis for himself. And I looked at it, and they said, hey, what about this issue of delegation? And Siraj was immediately defensive. And I have to tell you, I knew about delegation because this is what some of the venture capital investors who, they were kind of worried about this. Obviously, if you have a founder, CEO figure who is unable to delegate effectively, you're not going to grow beyond a certain mark in the company. So, but Siraj was really defensive about this. There are lots and lots of founders and entrepreneurs they find it hard to delegate. It's kind of their baby, their company, their enterprise. They really want to do as much as possible, and they don't trust other people to handle tasks. And I had to have some serious conversations with Siraj about, hey, the most successful entrepreneurs, if he wanted his company to truly succeed, he needed to learn how to delegate effectively. It's a learnable skill. And the scariest part of delegating effectively for Siraj was allowing other people to fail. Allowing them to fail, seeing them fail, and hey, this is a big problem. He had a lot of trouble with doing that. But once we had this conversation, and there were some research-based techniques, which I'm not going to go into here, about how to use social intelligence to have these effective conversations in a way that addresses his emotional concerns, his fear, his anxiety about these topics. He was able to see that for the long-term success of his venture, that he needed to be able to let go even if other people failed, and even if other people would not do the task as well as he would, because his time was more importantly spent elsewhere. So eventually with Siraj, we were able to move him to the stage where he was able to let go and taught him some skills in effective delegation. However, he would not have done this if he just proceeded along with his SWOT analysis, and then the company would not have grown beyond a certain ceiling, and the venture capitalist would have been kind of screwed because they invested the money expecting things to happen. So that's Siraj. Now there's another aspect of the SWOT analysis, and that's an individual case that it's more commonly done in group settings. In group settings, the biggest problem that I've seen is groupthink, where the opinions of team members align around the opinion of the most powerful person in the room. And that, of course, is a problem because the most powerful person in the room tends to be the top leader, who tends to be especially optimistic and overconfident. I'll give you an example from another consulting engagement. So Martha was the CEO of a Midwestern healthcare company that runs several hospitals in the Midwest, and I started consulting for them in early 2016. So consider what was happening in that time when I'm telling you this. There's a reason I'm telling you the year. She showed me her SWOT analysis from mid-2015, and I was surprised that there was nothing in the SWOT analysis about the dangers to Obamacare at that time. If you remember the politics of that time, there was the election going on and so on, and there was a lot of people were thinking that Hillary Clinton would win, and so she thought that, hey, this wouldn't be a problem. Obamacare is not going to be threatened, and her hospitals were actually quite dependent on Obamacare. So that was kind of part of the context. Well, look, I mean, I was showing her the statistics, the percentages, the probabilities, however, regardless of your political opinion, you need to understand that the probabilities were that was a significant probability that Donald Trump would win, and he was promising to do away with Obamacare. And so, the team, when the SWOT analysis that they did, completely ignored this issue. They were ignoring the elephant in the room and on the ballot. And so I convinced them eventually that, hey, even if they think that there's a low probability chance of Donald Trump winning, it was incredibly important to address that probability as a contingency and to create a contingency plan as part of a risk, a serious, real risk, in order to address this. So, with some prodding and shoving, they eventually ended up doing, there's a reason they hired me, right? They eventually did that. And they were so thankful they did. In a year, it was a little bit over a year later when I was reconnecting them. They were so thankful they did when the threats to Obamacare became real. It was really challenging. It was a tough time for the hospitals, but it would have been much, much worse if they didn't actually have this contingency plan in place for when the politics hit the fan, so to speak, and the Obamacare was under attack. So that was an example of how the SWOT analysis can lead a group of a serious large company leadership in the wrong direction. So when you're doing the SWOT analysis, what you want to be doing, or even thinking about strategic planning, the SWOT analysis is not a bad technique if you consider these two, the optimism bias, the overconfidence bias, and there's a number of other biases which I haven't gone into, a number of other cognitive biases which I haven't talked about, that you need to consider as part of doing strategic planning assessments. Otherwise, it'll give you a false sense of comfort, and you'll make your plans in such a way that they're going to be screwy, and you're going to cause yourself serious problems down the road. So don't do that. So think about the problems that you might not be thinking about. Think about the risks. Pay much more attention to the risks and the threats, and the risks, the threats, as part of the SWOT analysis, the threats, and the weaknesses that are going on. So the weaknesses with Saraj, the threats with Obamacare, with Martha. So that's the kind of things that I'm talking about here. And pay less attention to your impression of your strengths and your opportunities. Kind of decrease your optimism on those things. Watch out for these dangerous judgment errors. Focus, be vigilant about the problems that might arise, because those are things due to the optimism bias and the overconfidence bias that we don't tend to look at nearly enough. So it's only through this vigilance and discipline that you'll ensure that you can avoid the pride that goes before a fall. All right, there's much more about this in the blog on this topic, which is linked in the show notes. And there are a variety of other blogs linked in the show notes as well. What do you think about this episode? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please leave them in the comments. Please click like on this episode and share this episode with others. And I really hope that you will leave a review of this episode on wherever you're getting this episode. Make sure to click subscribe to this episode, to the show, the Wise Decision Maker Show, so that you can follow it, get future episodes, and follow us on social media. All of that is linked in the episode notes. To learn much more about making the wisest and most profitable decisions, I recommend that if you want a free resource, great free resource, my Wise Decision Maker course. 8 video-based modules at disasteravoidanceexperts.com/subscribe, and it's also linked in the notes. And if you want to get more in-depth information, you can always check out my book, Never Go With Your Gut, How Pioneering Leaders Make the Best Decisions and Avoid Business Disasters. All right, I will hope to see you on the next episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show. And as always, the wisest and most profitable decisions to you.